book of Jeremiah today. We finished up the book of Daniel, and Jeremiah has 52 chapters, 43,501 words. Takes about 58 pages in most Bibles, and it's the largest of the major prophets' books. It covers a period of time from 627 BC to 580 BC, 47 years in total. It's written predominantly in Judah, and it has an outline of about 3 parts. Chapters 1 through 33, before the fall, 34 through 45, the fall itself, and then 46 through 52, after the fall. Chapter 52 seems to be written by Baruch, and we'll continue to talk about that when we get there. But interesting book. And as you notice, we'll look to see where it fits amongst all of the other prophets, and you'll get a better time frame idea at that point. Remember, one of the key dates that we're looking at is the siege of Jerusalem and the fall of Jerusalem. And many of the prophets that were pre-exile and during the exile wrote about this great fall or great siege of Jerusalem and Judah. As 586 is that key date, and we know that there was 70 years of captivity, although there are some disputes about how we calculate when that started, whether it was the taking of Daniel and some of the key people from Israel, or whether it was after the siege or at the beginning of the siege. But in any case, that's what we're looking at. So we're looking at prophecies some 40 years before the siege as we open up these first chapters. And again, let me show you the chart to show you exactly where Jeremiah fits into these years of prophecy prior to the siege of Jerusalem. And then we'll pick up the narrative of chapter 1. On the right-hand side of the chart, about midway down, you see the book of Jeremiah. And therefore, you can take and stop this video at any time and look at this chart in more detail to see where it fits in. Remember, we want to study first 2nd Kings and 2nd Chronicles also to get a good time history on this. Jeremiah would live during the period of time when there were 5 kings in Judah. One only was there for a period of 3 months, so we almost don't count him, but we see Josiah, which was a good king, which is the king that was in power at the time that Jeremiah was called as a youth to be a prophet. And then we see Jehoahaz, a bad king for 3 months. Jehoiakim, a bad king for 11 years. Jehoiachin, Chin instead of Kim, a bad king only for a year. And then Zedekiah, a bad king for 11 years. So 18 years of a good king, 29 years of a bad king. So Jeremiah saw lots of things during these 5 kings that led over Judah. And we'll talk about that as we go through the different chapters. But in chapter 1, I think it's important for us to remember the calling of people that God calls. And the first thing that we see is in verse 5, we see the fact that God has a foreknowledge. Before Jeremiah was even conceived, God knew him. And the foreknowledge of God is quite an interesting thing. And the calling of God's men is quite an interesting thing because it tells us that he also ordained him for this ministry. In verse 6, we see that Jeremiah says, but I'm just so young and so youthful. And of course, we know that God quickly says that's not a problem. And we know in 1 Timothy 4:12, Paul said that to Timothy, don't let anybody despise your youthfulness. Let me stop there for just a minute. I think it's very important that we recognize that our youth have a lot to be used in the church. At the same time, I would also bring out the caution that in Proverbs it tells us that youth need to grow in their knowledge and also in their discipline and their discretion. Uh, Most of the sins of God's people uh, have occurred during their youthful years. So uh, we need to use our youth, but we need to also recognize that they need to be teachable so that they can gain knowledge and that they have to use discretion in that youthfulness. In any case, we see in chapter 6 that mention of youthfulness. And then in verse 19, we see that God told Jeremiah it wasn't going to be easy. It was going to be a difficult ministry. They were not going to accept what he had to say, and they were going to be against him. And then he gives a reason for his judgment. God always gives a reason for his judgment. It was their wickedness, it was their turning away from God, and it was their turning to idols. And in verse 15, it reminds us that God very often uses our enemies to bring about that punishment, that judgment for our unfaithfulness to him. But in verse 19, we find probably the best lesson application for us today in this opening chapter of Jeremiah. And that is that God will be with us when we are his and he has called us. And I want you to know, I believe that God calls every Christian. Not all are called to full-time Christian service or to be prophets as Jeremiah was, but I believe we're all called to his service. And he's promised us that he'd be with us in that service. And take a look very carefully at Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 19, and remember that he'll be with us. They will fight against you, but they will not overcome you. For I am with you to deliver you, declares the Lord. 7 applications then for today: the foreknowledge of God, the calling of God, not despising your youth, not going to be easy, gives reason for his judgment, often allows us, our enemies, to be the cause of our judgment, but he'll always be with us. That's my thought for the day. God bless you. Have a great day.